Signs of an imminent economic catastrophe just keep growing all around us. Experienced investors, economists, financial analysts, and other highly respected voices have been warning about the continued deterioration of our living standards and the collapse of our currency. However, most Americans seem to be in a state of numbness, and they don't realize the impending dangers of an inflationary spike. With so many other disasters going on, we can understand why most parts of society aren't listening to those warnings. People have their hands full trying to take care of their families and to make a living during one of the worst recessions this country has ever seen. But when prices start to rise at the grocery store, while housing prices skyrocket and healthcare costs keep spiraling out of control, it becomes evident that inflation is already a major problem. Perhaps those warnings never reach the average person also because the mainstream media keeps denying there's anything to worry about. Politicians and policymakers continue to overlook this issue so they can keep launching massive fiscal relief packages without ever considering the consequences that'll follow. Since the beginning of the health crisis, the Federal Reserve never ceased to inject more and more liquidity into the financial system, while the federal government always found a way to recklessly spend these fresh piles of newly created dollars. In a failed attempt to help the population, our leaders directed a fraction of that printed money to Americans through stimulus checks. But those have only made the problem worse, as they have resulted in rampant inflation and widespread shortages, and unfortunately, they weren't enough to ease the financial pain most people have been facing. Even though trillions upon trillions of dollars have been pumped into the economy, the U.S. still has 8.2 million fewer jobs than it did before the health outbreak. In fact, last Thursday, we learned that another 444,000 Americans filed new claims for unemployment benefits. Needless to say, in 2019, this figure would have been considered devastating and probably unacceptable. But now that things have been going from bad to worse for so long, that number is actually seen as good news, as the new normal make these absurdities look palatable. Political leaders were trying to artificially create an economic boom, but they ended up setting the stage for an implosion of epic proportions. And as dissonant voices have been silenced, today we decided to bring them back to the surface and share the warnings many experts have been sounding recently. One of the latest and most accurate alerts came from the economist John Williams, the founder of ShadowStats.com, who's been calculating alternative rates for decades and argues that the Fed has lost control of inflation. In an interview with Greg Hunter, Williams said we're about to see a combination of runaway inflation and economic implosion. That will lead us to a hyperinflationary economic collapse. It's not that we haven't been in an economic collapse already, he said. The Fed has been creating money at a pace that's never been seen before. You're basically up 75% in money creation year over year. This is unprecedented. Normally, it might be up 1% or 2% year over year. The exploding money supply will lead to inflation. You are soon going to be seeing a 10% range year over year, Williams predicted. Now keep in mind that when the Fed has to admit the official inflation rate is 10%, John Williams outlines that the shadow stats numbers are going to be up to around 15% or higher because the rates provided by the website's analysis cuts off all the accounting gimmicks that make inflation look less than it really is. Right now, the shadow stats inflation rate is above 11%, portraying the true rates most Americans are seeing right now, not the official 4.25% recently reported. Williams adds that the headline health crisis numbers have actually been a lot worse than official numbers have been reporting, which means we're not recovering quite as quickly. In early 2022, I'm looking for something close to a hyperinflationary circumstance and effectively a collapsed economy, he noted. Just like him, skilled investor and founder of Matterhorn Asset Management, Egon von Greyerz, has been emphasizing the colossal amounts of printed money that are fueling the creation of several asset bubbles and an unfounded bullish sentiment amongst investors that will likely end in tears. Von Greyerz says, as technological developments and markets go parabolic, we observe many market experts, even intelligent ones, forecasting that we're now in an exponential economic era. Thus, many believe that this will go on forever. This is the typical attitude at market and economic tops and guarantees that this will not end well, he exclaimed. Von Greyerz exposes that it is absolute nonsense to believe that exponential expansion based on deficits, debts, and fake money is the beginning of a new era. Anyone studying the economy and history of markets knows that the exponential moves indicate the end of an era, and not the beginning. As I have repeatedly said, history is our best teacher, and it both rhymes and repeats itself, and history now gives us dire warnings, he added. We know from statements at historical tops like 1929, 1987, or 2000 that politicians and investors believe that the trend will go on forever and that the world has made a paradigm shift. Many markets and investments are now going up exponentially, and very few forecast an end to this euphoric state, von Greyerz highlighted, reminding that a reckoning day seems to be fast approaching, and those who've been choosing to ignore the signs will be bitterly disappointed. On top of that, as we've greatly accelerated our journey toward an economic and financial meltdown of dramatic proportions, even investment legend Warren Buffett has started to sound the alarm. During the annual Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting, Buffett said that by analyzing the recent increase in transportation costs and the price of raw materials that corporations are having to take on and, consequently, pass on to consumers, we are seeing substantial inflation, he stated. We are raising prices. People are raising prices to us, and it's being accepted, he stated, hinting that most parts of the population have already got used to such outrageous price hikes and doesn't even know how to react anymore. According to data from Deutsche Bank, Americans have been searching for inflation online more frequently now than they've ever done in a decade. They've certainly been feeling the painful impacts of rising prices. But as the government keeps insisting that everything is okay, negating people's economic suffering and reaffirming there'll be no change in the current monetary policies, millions of Americans just don't know what to do to fight it. On the other hand, the wealthy groups of the U.S. society are always aware of potential threats that can compromise their gains, and they are deeply concerned about inflation. Many of them have begun offloading overly inflated stock at a very brisk pace in recent weeks, as reported by a recent Bloomberg piece which noted that when the nation's CEOs, billionaires, and corporate insiders start to run to the exits sooner than expected in what seems to be the end of a 13-year bull market, it's because they know there's something extremely wrong with the economy. And the imbalances happening in our current inflated equity markets are a clear signal that they have to leave before everything bursts. That's why Amazon.com's Jeff Bezos and Google co-founder Sergey Brin, as well as names like Mark Zuckerberg and Larry Ellison, have been offloading stock as the frothy valuations have propelled the ultra-rich to rethink holding onto their stock, says the report. But given that ordinary people do not have the same resources to fight the distressing effects of inflation, economists are urging the White House to expose the real situation to the people. Last Wednesday, after the government reported higher-than-expected inflation numbers, heightening fears of fresh trouble for the U.S. economy, former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers stressed in an interview that policymakers at the Fed and in the White House need to recognize that the risk of a Vietnam inflation scenario is now greater than the deflation risks on which they were originally focused. Whatever was the case a few months ago, it should now be clear that overheating, not excess slack, is the dominant economic risk facing the U.S. over the next year or two. He urged the administration to take 3 specific steps. The first is to publicly express greater concern about inflation as a way of tempering expectations of future inflation, which themselves can fuel inflationary economic behavior. Secondly, they have to signal that enhanced federal unemployment benefits will not be extended after their expiration. And thirdly, the U.S. government needs to slow the rush to distribute relief funds. Wherever possible, they should be trying to defer spending rather than get it out the door as soon as possible, Summers said. Likewise, in a new opinion piece to the Washington Post, financial analyst and politics writer Henry Olsen affirmed that government officials have been playing down the risk of inflation, and we should not believe them. The signs of looming inflation are all around us, Olsen wrote. Copper futures are now at a record high, joining many other industrial metals such as steel and aluminum that have also seen prices spike in recent months. These price hikes will soon drive up the cost of items that use these materials. Lumber prices are at record highs too, a development that will push up home prices. House prices have already been skyrocketing, up by an annual 17.2% in March, and likely to go up further as fewer people are putting their houses on the market. The historically volatile food and energy sectors are also on the price upswing, with oil prices already at or above their pre-outbreak levels, and food prices likely to keep rising, the analyst exposed. A couple of weeks ago, we reported Big Short's Michael Burry warning that the U.S. economy was headed to Weimar-like hyperinflation. He is famously known for having predicted the previous housing market crash. Back then, everyone preferred to ignore him and continued to believe the market's bullish run would go on forever. And we do know how things ended at that time. The crash almost sunk the entire world into a severe financial crisis. Today, Burry, who has adopted the online handle of Cassandra, as a reference to the Greek mythology priestess who was cursed to share true prophecies but to never be believed, once again being ignored. But it doesn't seem like a smart move not to listen to these alerts. Now it's time to wake up to the fact that we are steamrolling toward an economic disaster that will make the history books. And inflation is just one element of the many crises our society will have to deal with. So, pay attention to the real facts and to the voices that are underscoring problems that the media keeps sweeping under the rug. Do not uncritically believe in the rosy forecast provided by official sources. Otherwise, you will be blindsided by the coming perfect storm that will plunge our nation into a nightmarish depression. If you have found this video interesting, you'll find similar discussions on Michael Snyder's latest book called Last Prophecies of the Future of America, now available on Amazon. Thank you for watching and keep tuned for the next video.